Welcome to our first episode of Firing on All Syllables. We'll be aiming to provide invaluable tips and lessons on matters related to business, technology, language, social responsibility, and we'll hear from some of the world's most influential leaders. The podcast will be hosted by Gary Kalaci, our CEO of Alexa Translations. But for today's episode, I will be the host. So yours truly, my name is Mark Vecchiarelli, and I head up the marketing at Alexa Translations. Uh, Gary, I'm super excited to chat to you today and to learn a bit more about you. What is this podcast all about? Why does the world need another podcast? And all of those fun questions. So we'll dive into that and more. But why don't you start off by telling us just who is Gary Kalaci?
Well, it's a big question and hard to be very concise with it as well. But I'll try to give a short answer to the extent I can. Uh, I'm a lawyer by trade and have been in the translations industry for over 2 decades, which sounds like a long time to talk about it. Uh, I am an immigrant to Canada from Eastern Europe, Albania specifically, really, and with some passions for history, anthropology, cultures, which ties in nicely to the translation industry and everything that we do. Needless to say, tying the cultures to the and languages to the legal industry, which has been really where we've spent a lot of our time as an organization, but also personally. And what really drove even bringing this podcast together is, look, there's all these leaders that we have a privilege of chatting with all the time, different areas of expertise, really thoughtful leadership in their respective organizations or industries. And we thought, what better way than to try to bring them all together concisely and get some of their thoughts so that everyone can learn from them.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And we will dive into a number of those items even further. But and it's no easy answer always. Who is who is anybody? Who is Gary Klaus? So you mentioned from Europe. Where were you born specifically? I'm wondering, kind of maybe if you could give us even a bit of. A lot of people do know you, but what kind of kid were you? I kind of want to get the backstory a little bit of who you were to become who you are today.
So I was born in Albania, moved to Canada in 2000, and the interesting part, even as a kid, to your question, what kind of kid were you? I was a social kid, which probably doesn't come across as a huge surprise to a lot of people that know me. In fact, my parents tell a story of me being a 2-year-old and them taking me to the beach. They said, "Oh, we knew all the people around us because you would go to every umbrella on the beach and make friends with everyone there." So as a result, we got to meet everybody as part of the process. So social, largely well behaved, and I say largely because just like any other kid, there were the occasional episodes where I wasn't as well behaved. But the curiosity for languages and wanting to learn about people was started early on. So even learning other languages started pretty early on in the process. And as growing up, I was sort of relentlessly curious about everything happening, whether it was what's happening in these other countries, what's happening in these other cultures, and that really translated well as life went on.
That's great. That's great. That it completely makes sense, especially if people do know you. I think that is a pretty accurate picture. So not too much change, I suppose, from your younger days till now. But maybe just another question that I had. Maybe as you were growing up, what kind of influences did you have, either from authors or it could be TV? What helped to shape you as well as you were growing up?
Yeah, so growing up in a communist country, TV was not a huge influence, partially because you had very limited TV options, which can be good in many other ways. And I probably started getting good exposure to channels with cartoons and sort of engaging television shows after grade 5, 6, let's say. But up until then, it was relatively limited. So as a result, it was a lot of reading. So books were the good friends, and I remember actually being on this race with the library cards to get as many stamps for each book that you're getting from the library. And interesting, couple interesting concepts. So starting with some of the Greek mythology books from the Iliad and the Odyssey. So and you look at them differently as a child, but obviously you're visualizing a lot. And it's interesting how much books help with visualization, because you have to visualize, right? Like they're describing it, and then you're saying, what is happening here, all the way to my father was a big influence in the typo readings that I did. So his repertoire was actually quite broad. A lot of the European influencers, as you can imagine, from Voltaire to Goethe to Tolstoy, and even books like with America's Native American stories, one called Osceola, Prince of the Seminoles, about today's Florida, and the evolution of how Western civilizations affected the Aboriginal communities that were here earlier. So imagine now being in a communist country in Albania, and you're trying to visualize this, and it's a narrative where you're really learning from the perspective of somebody being from that community, from the Aboriginal communities, Native communities in the U.S., saying, here's what this area was like, beautiful Florida, etc., and then to here's where we are today. So it was but as a child, that was really something that opens a lot of horizons and makes you think in different ways and put yourself in the shoes of others a lot. And when you're reading a lot of the European literature and all the thinking that happens around it, you learn, and different writers obviously bring in different things to the table, but anything from human suffering to war, what war can do, to the beauties of art, and how people could live in Western Europe. And again, you're imagining all of this because you couldn't travel out of the country at that point in time. So
That's wonderful. It's not wonderful that necessarily you couldn't travel, but wonderful that books really do provide that opportunity for imagination, as you mentioned, and then further that you can kind of travel through the books through that imagination. So that's incredible. What about? Those are the books that maybe inspired you. What about the people in your life, either growing up or today? But who inspired you? Who pushed you to go further? To maybe somebody you aspired to be like, or just gave you a spark to kind of uh, you know maybe open a new door or something to that effect.
no, and it's really, and there's been a lot of good people along the way. So it's sometimes I've had a lot of good role models, and I've been very fortunate to have had good access to mentors as well along the way. But starting as a kid, uh, the parents were a big influence. They both came from uh, essentially blue collar families. They were the first ones in their families to make it to higher education, which made a huge difference, especially when. Uh, Again, the communist regime, not all kids from the family could go to higher education because there was only limited spots. So typically you could only really send one or two kids at the most to go and do higher education. So that those limits to opportunity really made them appreciate and really work hard for what they had. And my parents really helped instill that in me, saying, look, like this could be throughout life, and sometimes you can't predict the circumstance you're put in, but what you can do is really manage how you conduct yourself and what you do with it. So seeing the limited opportunities with them, it really made me think differently. And I remember my dad saying, uh, listen, like, your Albanian is great, but if you're going to get a job later on, you're going to need to learn other languages because, in an international marketplace, you can't really do well. So you better start to learn other languages. And I'm like, but Dad, I'm 8. So, it's, so this was a conversation where he started putting things into perspective and to think a certain way. And it was interesting because that's how then I got into taking Greek classes, which was I was born in a part of Albania that's right by the Greek border. So naturally, there was the affinity to actually learn Greek, etc. As you can imagine, different alphabet and relatively different language. But what happened, I took Greek for a year, and in the summer afterwards, I was able to go to Thessaloniki in Greece for a couple of weeks on a summer vacation. And then you start putting things into perspective, saying, this is I see how this works now. I can actually use what I learned and communicate with people that I otherwise would have had a hard time communicating with. So that was the proof was in the pudding at that point, and I was hooked. From there on, I couldn't give languages. I couldn't move away from languages. So that was sort of a good push to where it came from. Then growing, I started studying other languages. Again, there was Albania was close to Italy. The other side was Italy, so learned some Italian early on. A lot of Italian television channels and English at the same time. So these were sort of the first few languages, but that opened a lot of horizons as a result. And then you grow up as you grow up a bit more, and I say grow up as in like grade 7, grade 8. You're like, oh well, I can learn more languages now because clearly it's not that bad. So that the and this wasn't unique to me. Just for there were a lot of people in Albania and probably throughout Eastern Europe that did learn a lot of languages, and it did open a lot of horizons for them. And to this day, the ones that do have continue to have the best employment prospects are the ones that were multilingual and were able to use that to their advantage. But I'll fast forward a bit more to one last role model that is sort of more globally known and than some of the immediate ones that I've had from university and to this day, to our current date. But somebody that I also always looked at with a level of respect that was unprecedented and that I had an overlap with his lifetime was Nelson Mandela. And I'll tell you why. Um, some of some of the audience and some of the listeners will know I did a project in South Africa. I went 12 years in a row, and it was in a community outside of Cape Town called Kailicha, which is a township that I particularly enjoyed doing this work with. It was largely with high school students, really education empowerment based and entrepreneurship. So working with a lot of the kids in the high school and some of the local community on entrepreneurial activities. Throughout this time, I really got to learn a lot more about South Africa, which gave me context. And then everyone knew of Nelson Mandela and what he did for South Africa. But to put into perspective, here's the country, here's the end result, here's how things evolved, understanding the history of it, and then what he did was particularly impressive. So things and parallels that I drew. He learned Afrikaans very well, which at the time, if you think about it, was the language of the oppressor, and he was a law student that used a lot of his knowledge. When it came to just before the transition, '94, he was very open minded, despite what he had been through. He said, "Look, this isn't a time for vengeance. This isn't the time to say." Time to avenge what has happened to us. It's really time to reconcile and move things along. It's not about personal vendettas, but rather for the greater picture. And I think that's important. The making sure that we see the bigger picture and not get lost in some of the details. And being a CEO of a company, you better see the bigger picture. Otherwise, you actually really run into issues. And that was something particularly that. And many other learnings from him, but a very sophisticated individual, from the way he spoke to the way he engaged with people, to really understanding the human nature and understanding human nature and the high level of EQ, etc., and learning how to actually be more understanding of human nature was a really good takeaway from his leadership.
That's wonderful. That's, I mean, all amazing sources of inspiration, especially even from, your parents. I think that's that whole thread line or that whole thread through your life. I think makes a lot of sense. Again, for people that know you, I can personally attest that a lot of those elements that you picked up that you embody. I can see them every day, and I know that you one other thing I can attest to is that the hard work element is there, which again might sound obvious. It's required if you're going to grow a company as we have, but uh, a lot of people either who are in the same spot or who are growing their company today might be wondering, how do I get this drive? I know I get emails from you. I know we can work around the clock sometimes. So what drives you? What makes you push so hard to build and grow not only the business but yourself? Like, what drives you?
So, I gave a bit of the historical background as to being here today, coming from limited opportunity, then really appreciating when you have it, and to always think back and not forget that this is not something to take for granted, and also something that really makes you appreciate how great a country Canada is, and a lot of the society that we live in, and you know at any given day we can complain about certain circumstances of something happening, etc., but in the great scheme of things, it's I think it's the best country in the world. But I think people would agree that whether they may not think it's the best, it's certainly one of the best countries. So as a result, you have to think, look, I am given sort of the gift and the opportunity to be in one of the best circumstances. Make the most of it, because there are a lot of people out there that struggle to really be here, and you can appreciate how many people would want to come to Canada if they could, and a lot of people are consistently trying to come to Canada as a result. So
Yeah,
that's a big part of it, sort of not forgetting where you came from and the ability to have this opportunity. And this is something that goes well beyond immigrating to Canada. Even for Canadians that have been here for decades, the opportunities are now far better than they used to be at a certain point in time. So
yeah,
thinking that way and then really making the most of it is a big part of it.
yeah,
The second part really is at an individual level, and this is where I always thought if you're going to do something, you really need to be dedicated to it. Otherwise, you can make a living doing a lot of things. But if you really want to shine at something, you have to do better. You have to move in creative ways faster than the competition. Otherwise, you're just going to be one of the competitors. So that means you have to put in the time and the hard work, etc. And I'm not taking away from the balance that is needed in life, and there is a time for needing to relax and to unwind, etc.
yeah,
But it's also about when you are working to really be pushing and really getting the productivity up, and knowing that the team that is looking at you for leadership, you can ask them to work hard. If you yourself are going to be like, well, I did it, I did my time for today, it's on you guys now. So if you're expecting them, and God knows our team at Alexa works really hard to some of the deliverables that are often going past midnight with for anybody that is any of our audience that are in the security space, they'll know exactly what it takes to be in those circumstances, all the way to our programmers that are often working around the clock to meet our deliverables. If you don't lead by example, then they're not going to buy into the vision that we have. And one of the areas that we really push at Alexa is this relentless, dedicated quality, and also this dedicated client service that is to the point where we take it to the extreme, and that is part of the value add to our client base.
yeah,
We want to make sure that they are seeing us as the client service that they're really happy with, and it has to start with me. uh, Al Varney, one of my mentors and former CEO of Xerox Canada, always says the organizations take the shape of their leaders, and I really take that to heart, because if I want the team to really follow what I'm saying, I have to do what I do and practice what I preach. Otherwise, you're not going to get the results you want.
yeah. 100%. Completely agree. And I think that's probably a good segue into, I think as we understand you a bit more, I think maybe we're alluding to Alexa Translations as the company. Maybe we can start to just divulge or start to dive into a little bit about Alexa Translation. So we'll start high level and then we'll kind of deep dive a little bit. So what is Alexa Translations? Another big question.
Well, in the most simplistic way, it's a translation organization, as the name indicates, but also with two large divisions: one focusing on professional translation, and one on the technology around translation, AI, machine translation technology. And as the evolution has happened over the years, both are large divisions with exciting things that are happening on both ends. And I was talking earlier about our commitment to service and quality. We actually have it as one of our core values: fanatical commitment to service and quality. Each one embodies that in their own ways, where they're really driving on the professional services side, how do I get you the quality with the timeline you need? And on the technology side is how do I consistently make this better so that it emulates exactly what you're looking for and it adapts to you as an organization?
Yeah,
And what can our tech team do to really understand what our clients need and deliver?
that's great. And so, where did this is kind of something I know we shot a separate video for this, but maybe you could tell our listeners here where the name originated from, Alexa.
When I first started in the translations industry, I was not very creative. The early sole proprietorship, I just called it Kalaci Translations after my last name. And Kalaci Translations was fine, but certainly not the organization that was going to become the global entity that we are today. And it felt a bit self-centered to actually have it based on my last name as we grew past a certain stage. So we wanted something that embodied more about what we were doing and what our focus was. As you know, with our focus in the legal financial industry, we wanted something that had referred to lexicon. We want also, being in the language industry, lexicon, like something that referred to vocabulary and terminology. So we said lexicon. That would be, we need to have those as base, part of the base of the words. Then this was a time where alphabetical ranking really mattered because whether you were in the yellow pages or whether you were listed at a conference, the first two letters of the alphabet, you were going to get more attention because you were going to be one of the first few on the list. So we said a lexicon, and that was sort of the first instance. And then said, how can we shorten it and make it a bit more concise, because you also don't want something too long. Translations in itself is a very long word, so you're like you need the first word for it to be a bit more succinct. So that's where Alexa came from. And then we tested in different languages to make sure it didn't mean anything offensive. It was easy to remember. It was easy for people to say, again, from different cultures and different languages, being the business we're in. And so it was a iterative process over a few months. Uh, so we called it Alexa Translations. We filed a trademark for it, and along with it, breaking the language barrier, which was really the intention all along. We wanted something that said, what is the one mantra? What is something that we're always going to commit to doing? And breaking the language barrier was the critical component of it. If you could distill it in a few words, breaking the language barrier was the best way to say it.
That's great, and it makes a lot of sense as you mentioned. And since we're in the on the topic of names and our origins, the firing on all syllables also makes a lot of sense as we're a translation company. And some of the folks that we're going to be interviewing, of course, are very influential folks that do have, are firing on all cylinders, but the syllables language play with language makes a lot of sense. And we will have a little section later where we go a little further into more about the language side of the business from that concept. But before I go there, maybe another question is just and I think we maybe alluded to it, but maybe we can give a more clear answer around why does the world need another podcast at all? There's thousands, if not millions, of them out there. What do you see as the value for this podcast?
I listen to podcasts a lot personally, and there's thousands of options out there. But I tend to have some affinity to things, areas I'm interested in, topics I'm interested in, authors that I'm interested in. So part of what we're looking to cater to here is we know the industries we play in and some of the individuals we work with. And I've personally learned a lot from a lot of the people that we will be interviewing over the next few months. And the learnings from them, to package them in a way that could be consumed in a sort of more mass consumed, it would really be a pity to not capture some of the learnings from key leaders in the industry and say, hey, here they are for everyone else to also know. And there are many individuals in our communities that we sometimes there are people that want to meet them and have an opportunity to talk to them, but not always very easy to get to speak with them. So partially because they're very busy, not necessarily because they're not accessible. So what better way to learn more about them, what they've done, what they've accomplished, than to actually be in a webcast with them, and on a podcast rather. Sorry, I've done I've done a lot of webcasts recently. So terminology is getting my terminology is getting a little mixed up. But the context very much is provide that accessibility. Let's get the gems that have been accumulated over time with the learnings from all these various people. And no matter how much we know, we the one thing I've learned to date is that I realized how little I've known when you talk to some of these accomplished people that you speak to, and how much there is to learn from each one of them.
It really is invaluable. And I have seen the guest list as I've been helping to assemble it. And really, these are incredible folks that we're going to be uh, talking to and just getting to know, similar to what we're doing now. But there's so many probably nuggets that we can take away from them, life lessons and otherwise business lessons, of course. So I'm really looking forward to hearing those talks as well. Maybe a related question is, again, for people that know you, everyone knows you. How do you get to know so many people? What is your secret in, maybe it's a networking question, but maybe it's even more broad than that. I think people, it's just such a broad network. Is there any tip or trick or secret that you have to, or is it just the grind of and the hustle of getting out there and meeting with people?
I think it's a genuine desire to go meet people and really caring for who they really are, and what they like, what they focus on, and obviously building a business. The networking became a critical component of it, because you could have the best product in the world, and I say this all the time. If people don't know about it, it doesn't matter how good your product is. So you really need to let the world know of what you have and what you're working out there. But in the process, you are meeting really good people. And as long as you genuinely care about people, it's not just a selling exercise. You can truly develop meaningful relationships. And that's been something very important for me, because no matter what you do, this is your social capital. The people you're meeting are very important to your future and what you end up doing, whether you continue in the same industry or in with the same organization, etc. So when people ask me, especially young people in university or just starting university, what to do, I tell them, be relentlessly curious. Always try to learn about people, what they've done, about different things that you have an interest in, and that was a big driver around it. Something else that is also very important to me, and it is critical to who I am, was the giving back to the community. So a lot of the not-for-profits, a lot of the boards I've joined, charitable boards. So this, while you're actually giving back in the community, you're also meeting some great people in the process. And it's, we often forget that while we're giving back, there's a lot we get out of it as well, personal satisfaction, but as well, you're surrounded by like-minded people that truly care about their own communities. And as a result, you have that in common as you're building up this organizations that you're getting involved with and volunteering in some capacity.
Yeah, that's great. That kind of segues into another question that I had as well around. I mean, maybe it's a broader question around, business tips and advice that you could share. But like, the being relentlessly curious, I think, is just good general advice, as well as the getting involved with not for profits or other associations, maybe in the industry. Is there anything else maybe you can think of? And I know these are broad, but um, just in terms of tips or advice you might have for our listeners, whether it comes to business or networking, uh, things that you can think of off the top of your head.
No, for sure. And whenever I get asked, I always say find good mentors, and people you'd really love to learn from. And even though sometimes you'd say, "Well, I'd like to learn from Mark, for example," but I don't know that Mark will make time for me. You'll be surprised how often people are open-minded to it. If you tell them, "Look, I'd love to once a quarter buy you a coffee and really ask this question," or even to virtual chat, whichever is easier for you, half an hour, whatever you can spare. It's rare that people will be flattered that you ask them, and it's rare that they'll say, "You know what, I'm so busy, I don't have time for you." And if that happens, you're right back where you started. So the worst situation is that you are you were exactly in the same situation you were before this happened. So uh, the worst case scenario is not so bad. And if you identify a few key mentors that you could go afterwards and say, look, here's three that I ideally would like to learn from. And you could have all three if they all three say yes, but even one works just as well. You'd be surprised how often people say yes. It's something I learned early on at a leadership conference and saying, go get mentors and up to five mentors. And the rationale behind it is you can learn different skills from different people. Different people do are known for different areas of expertise or different habits, and so don't be shy. Learn from people, and it's also a level of humility. So to ask for that help and to ask to be open-minded about that, it also says, look, I don't know everything. There's always room I can learn from. And I mentioned Al earlier, who is one of my mentors and that I spend the most time with in an organized fashion. And every time I talk to him, and we've been talking now for over 2 years, there's nuggets that I get out of it, and always taking notes. And uh, I mentioned humility in the process, but I think being, no matter what you achieve in life, having a level of humility is extremely important. And it's something that I always try to focus on myself, make sure that humility is always there. So again, to practice what we preach, and making sure that at a personal level we embody it. So whether this is being accessible to my own team at every level, so to everyone in the organization saying, I'm happy to talk to you, and I'll always make time for you if you want to talk to me,
Mhm.
across the board as well. So when people do ask me for mentorship, that I also practice what I preach. But
Yeah.
to also say, to it's shocking sometimes how much you can learn from people that you didn't expect just by actually being open-minded, being curious, asking questions. And you hear a lot from very famous people that say, listen more than you speak. And being a social person, that's very hard for me, but that it's such an important skill that there are a lot of people you can learn a lot from. And I remember sort of graduating from university, and you wanted to show off what you've learned and be like, oh, and I read this article on this, and your opinion is changing like the wind, because you're still learning, and you don't have solidified opinions because your information is relatively limited. And then you talk to people that have been around and have seen a few more things than you, and you're like, okay, there is more substance that I need to keep accumulating. So always be humble, always learn, and always ask for help and mentorship.
That's great. Yeah, just to echo that too. I think you know, asking is so important as you mentioned. Just the first step of just asking for the mentorship is great. I also received the same tip about, almost like have your own informal board of advisors, your own, not just one mentor, but look for several for all the reasons you mentioned. It's just different opinions and different ideas. So you'll be probably more robust, as a person as a result. And I love the last point too. Humility is so important. So, um, uh, all great tips and advice as well. Um, to that end,
Sorry, just before you go to the next point,
oh
I
yeah,
know I talked about it earlier, but certainly giving back, like always making some time for giving back, it'll do a lot for you in the process while you're helping others. And I promise you this, it's where I'm talked about the project in South Africa and continue to be involved with, whether it's the Board of Junior Achievement that I'm very passionate about, with financial literacy and entrepreneurship for youth. These are things that I can, the at a personal level, I get a lot of satisfaction from, in terms of seeing the advancements that youth can have with that level of effort. But also the people that we surround ourselves with while doing that work will really help you grow as a person.
that's a great point. That's a great addition. Just one maybe question around. So good advice, of course, but I'm sure you've faltered in places along the way. You've made some missteps. Maybe what's you could share with the audience, like what's one mistake or more that you learned from, just in hopes that maybe we can prevent somebody else from having the same misstep or misfire.
Where do I start to mark the amount of mistakes? It's and I will tell you is a friend of mine. investment banker said to me once, "Don't confuse activity for progress." So it's to be strategic about what you do. So obviously, trying to build a business, I was trying to be everywhere, meet everybody, etc. But I always kept in the back of my mind, don't confuse activity with progress. So obviously, always be busy doing what you need to be doing, but need to be doing this. So doing the right things is just as important. So being smart about the activities and where you focus your time. You only have so much time, so you need to make sure it's dedicated to the right activities, the right people, and not throw it freely. And especially to younger people that may be listening to this, they have more time in their hands. So please go out there and do different things so you can experience different things. But as you're learning the process, then try to be more selective with the areas you enjoy more and you get the
Mhm.
most out of it.
Mhm.
So that's an important part. The second learning, again, mistakes I did as growing the organization. We had some really good people. We were very fortunate to have some really good people at Alexa over the years, and I've seen my evolution as a leader, and a lot of mistakes I made early on with team members, etc. When you get caught up in the trying to build a business and moving on to the next thing, etc., sometimes you don't stop to say, look, let's think of our people, and are they getting what they need out of it? Are they growing? And to always really think about making sure that they're taken care of in the process, because ultimately they're representing you in front of your client base. They're helping build your products, your services. So you have to care about them. And it was one of those things that had to be a balancing act, and I've made my share of mistakes along the way. And there were many situations I would do differently in over time, and the key is to learn from them. You can't undo the past. I mean, you shouldn't certainly. To the extent that there were mistakes, you can. It's never too late to say sorry and to apologize. But the key is to learn and make sure that you're growing as an individual, as a leader,
Yeah.
as a colleague. Regardless of your circumstances.
Yeah. It touches on your earlier points, about humility too, even just to be able to go back to those people with that humility and, like you said, apologize if necessary, where necessary. So that makes a lot of sense as well. And humans, just in general, it's always a challenging dynamic. Everybody has off days, on days, and sometimes off months, or there's periods of time that is just challenging in people's lives. So uh, that's great. Maybe just to shift gears a little bit, in terms of one thing we didn't really touch on, aside from our own technology at Alexa, I was curious about, other than Alexa translations AI, what kind of tools or software do you like? What tools help you do your job, if any? Are there ones that kind of stand out? Just curious from a techie, putting my techie hat on, what tools do you use?
It is funny being in the technology space. I've been relatively simplistic in terms of the tools, but I'm glued to my phone. So a variety of apps that I use for productivity and also from keeping track of the activities. So anything as simple as an app for tasks, like so that you can prioritize tasks and say, here's what I need to do today, and here's what's nice to do. Having any tools that are actually consistently measuring or your productivity in certain areas. So I wanted to send out this many emails, etc. Having some metrics around it. So, and the reason why I'm not being very specific as to which ones, it's obviously there's so many out there that it's more conceptually what types of tools are useful than endorsing a particular one.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that I have an issue with
No,
endorsing
no. I
one.
mean, we don't. We're not getting any kickbacks from any of these
That's right.
organizations. But no, just curious. And I think the productivity piece is important. And even just, maybe this is another question, is just around scheduling your time as a CEO. And this might be a great question for all of our other guests too. Is how do you manage all the multitude of I mean, there's people that internally that we need to meet with, clients that we have to meet with, and then your other obligations, strategy meetings, and all of those things. Do you have any tips or tricks for? Is there any? I don't know if there's a magic bullet, but do you have any tips or tricks for how to be, efficient with your time?
Yeah, so speaking of humility, Mark, still learning on that. I haven't found the perfect ratio just yet, but tying it to our fanatical commitment to service and quality, I'm always make time and sure to respond in quick fashion to our clients, externally and internally. And when I say clients internally, I mean colleagues within the organization. So that is an important part of it, which means you're finding a lot of time pockets in between meetings so you could actually stay on top of the correspondence.
Yeah.
At the same time, I am one that likes to move things along as fast as I can. So I'm getting emails now when people say, "Oh, well, let's meet in the new year," and I'm like, "The new year is 6 weeks from now. Can we just can we find a pocket here? Can we?"
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I'm keen to fill the days as much as possible, which doesn't isn't always optimal for a lot of things you need to do. I like to take the weekends largely off. So other than small things, it's the time to reflect and for me to really think what are things I could be doing better, sort of a little less focused. And when our mind wanders is often when we can be the most creative. As leaders, we have to. Not as just leaders, in any position you're in, thinking creatively, thinking a bit out of the box, reflecting on what you're doing can be very important. So I'll do evening walks or weekends, and that's sort of the time to really think. And also, uh, tying into your question earlier, so that's when I'll do a lot of the podcasts and the
Mhm.
audiobooks, which for me really got my I can't say reading levels up, but listening levels up, or
Mhm.
being able to go through books, because I'd have sometimes such long days when I would read a book before bed. I wasn't making it very far before would actually go to bed. So books I would enjoy, I wasn't getting through them quickly enough. And the actual audiobooks and podcasts really help with that. But in the process, it's giving you an opportunity where you're just walking and sort of there's something that you're listening to, but it still gives your mind an opportunity to wander. And you need that for a variety of areas, because the week sometimes it's inevitable. You need to make time for your clients, for your team, to make sure that they're nurtured, and some of your time is inevitable to do that. But then you still need the time to really think big picture, and that's where finding those pockets is important.
That's great. One final question, and then we'll shift gears once more. But so similar to the techie question about what kind of tools or software you like, what kind of companies or brands do you like? And when I say brands, doesn't have to be their logo or something, but more so their what they represent. Who's doing it right. And if you don't want to name names on that one too, that's fine. Just maybe conceptually, curious about who you're looking at when you're looking at companies and brands that are doing it right in the marketplace.
So I'm a sucker for brands that are really listening to their customers and adjusting it. So it's not here's what we wanted to roll out and here's what you're going to get, but rather we roll this out. We notice that people like this segment of it. So you are right. You are the client. We are going to adapt to what you need, not what we thought you need.
Right.
And that's really to me, it's the products I use, the sort of everything I like, where is organizations and companies that build their products and their services in the best way to get it done. So
Yeah.
to the extent I can afford the products that they make, really the ones that are focused on the delivery and the quality of their products and services. So if it is my computer, it's going to be, what is one that makes my life easy. Not every time there's an error here you have to do this, like what's going to make my life easy. But same thing with my phone, the clothing, it's shoes, etc. Like it's
Yeah.
everything is, are you in the business of making this? Is this what you're good at making? Then this is what I want to focus on.
Awesome. Yeah. So client first, it sounds like, which is also, I guess, our philosophy too, at Alexa, or customer first, maybe. But that's great. And so I think what I'll do now, this was a bit of a surprise, but I wanted to test this out on our first podcast, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe we use it on future ones, maybe not. But for the Firing on All Syllables podcast, we were thinking of doing a few rapid fire questions. Um, so these will be, possibly one word answers, but I'll just go through these real quick. and you give me the first thing that comes to your mind. What's your favorite word?
Love.
Awesome. And what word do you hate?
Hate.
Nice. What word do you have a
Well,
hard time?
sorry, I want to give context to that.
Yeah.
It's this is hate, vengeance, etc. It's something that takes a lot of energy out. Whether you're driving and somebody pisses you off on the road, in my approach, I'm fascinated with Stoics and the philosophical movement. And one of their main sayings is, we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it. So the the I could say hate in that sense because it is that, but I would say self control if I were to be a bit more strategic about it.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. What word do you have a hard time pronouncing?
Oh, well, I'll give you some funny stories here. And this is not exclusive to me, but I'll tell you as an Eastern European. When I first moved to Canada, I had a hard time saying the difference between beach and bit. The word it would often become a complicated word for me, and sometimes get me in trouble.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, and I know it wasn't exclusive to me, but it does get immigrants in trouble. The word kernel. So I used to pronounce it very phonetically, colonel. So
Yes, yeah, yeah.
which it's a little cumbersome when you try to say it phonetically, and kernel is a far easier way to say it. But I
Yeah.
remember when I was corrected on that one, being like, "Oh, thank you, that made my life a lot easier."
The English language definitely has some doozies. Doozies probably one unto itself, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting, difficult words for sure for pronunciation.
And these
Um,
were not even particularly difficult, but that's what's interesting. Like, lengthy, complex words I didn't necessarily have issues with. It's sometimes was accent driven or exposure driven.
yeah,
I used to also have a funny way to say the word focus, which is also something a lot of immigrants can sometimes struggle with. But yet here we are. I've learned.
nice. I feel like there's even more stories we could get into with those, but
Absolutely.
what?
Sorry, Mark, if you'll
What
indulge me, one more
yeah,
thing.
yeah, please, please.
So before my English skills are what they are today, so now I can get by with English fine. But in the early days when I was learning English, I used to listen to a lot of music in English and make my own sort of interpretation of what they were saying. And there's a song from the 90s about All Night Long, and me calling it Old Nylon, like the material nylon. So I'm like, Old Nylon, of course. Why wouldn't there be a song about Old Nylon?
I feel like there's probably some websites we can link to after with misheard lyrics. There's a bunch of those. That's great. A couple more quick ones. Just what's your favorite word in another language?
The there's a word in Arabic where you refer to somebody with love, habibi, which is it's the Arabic, by the way, is not a language I speak well. In fact, it's very superficial, but it's a word where endearing. In India, Pakistan, they use this word bhai to refer to somebody as brother, etc. And there's obviously different language like that. It's a very loving and respectful way to approach it, and I just find we need more of that in our lives.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And very bubbly, Habibi. It's got that bouncy
Well,
thing.
that's it. That's it. I mean, how many Arabic songs have you heard that have the word Habib in it? I think there's a reason behind it. It's not exclusive to me.
Very musical. Yeah, that's wonderful. And then, how many languages can you speak?
Ah, well, because I had a hard time narrowing the number of which language I was going to say. Bailando, or the Spanish word for dancing, is also I'm keen on. I've always enjoyed dancing and did even classical dancing for many years. So the but to get back to your language to the number of languages, so I mentioned earlier this story about starting with Greek and then going to Italian and English, and then I started learning some German, then some French, some Spanish, dabbled into Arabic. So needless to say, obviously Albanian is my native language. So needless to say, it's hard to be fluent in all of the languages, but I I would get by at a basic level in these languages, and it is what you learn is exposure is critical, and to be in touch with all of them at the same time is challenging.
So it sounds like about a dozen or so.
Oh
Is
no, no, it's more like eight.
oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, two is amazing. Never mind eight. So that's wonderful.
Very
Uh,
basic level. And as I always say, I don't do any of our translation. If I did our translation, we'd be out of business. It's been
yeah,
years since I did translation myself.
but conversational in all of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And then finally, one word to describe yourself.
This no, this is. Oh, I feel like this is one of those questions when politicians are asked in front of the on TV, and then they give a really lengthy answer to try to get to something. But I would say resilience, resilient. I think um, sort of throughout my upbringing and to today, naturally, all our lives are not predictable. They're not always just following a perfect example. There will always be deviations. There will always be things that don't go according to plan. And we
Mhm.
talked about earlier about the importance of not control self control and how we can't control what happens to us, but how we react to things. So being resilient about it is it's very important because that's what we can control is how we react, what we're doing, the persistence that comes with it.
Yeah,
So I would say resilient.
that's amazing. And I think that brings us perfectly full circle from the beginning as we started chatting about this. Resilience is so critical, whether it was from your upbringing to building the business to just day to day life, and it's such a great attribute for people to have. So, what a perfect way to close it off. I want to thank you, Gary, for taking the time to chat today to give us a bit more of a lens into your, who you are and what the company's all about and what the podcast ultimately is going to be about. I'm actually very excited about the guests that we're going to have and to pick their brains about their lives and their tips and tricks in business and in life. So thank you again so much for the chat today. I just want to remind everybody to make sure to subscribe if you'd like to get new episodes coming at you in your inbox. We've got you covered. If you'd like to find where to do that, you can go to firingonallsyllables.ca. Thank you very much. You can find us on all the podcasts platforms as well. And look forward to future episodes. Thank you again, Gary.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I look forward to doing the next few sessions. And in the spirit of what I said earlier, if you would like to connect with me, reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I promise I'll make the time to connect with you. And if you don't have LinkedIn, get LinkedIn. It'll be important.
Excellent. Thank you very much.